name is Sara, and this is not the kind of story you tell lightly. It's the kind of story that weighs on you like a stone in your chest, the kind of memory that wakes you up at night, wondering how your own mother could ever stand in a courtroom and paint you as less than what you are. For years, I believed family was unshakable, the one bond that even betrayal and bitterness couldn't sever. But life has a way of teaching you that sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers, but from the ones who should have stood by your side. It all started the day my ex-husband filed for custody of our son. He had always been manipulative, always quick to find the cracks in people and wedge himself into control. We had divorced years earlier, and though I thought I had freed myself from his grip, he found new ways to pull me back into the storm. He knew exactly where to strike. My child, my most vulnerable point. He filed his petition claiming I was unfit, unstable, and incapable of providing a safe home. It was a strategy I had seen in courtrooms many times before, throwing mud and hoping some of it stuck, but I never thought he'd get the kind of help he did. When I walked into the courthouse, I already felt the heavy air of betrayal. My mother was sitting beside him, her face calm, her posture straight, like she had every right to be there. She wouldn't meet my eyes. For weeks, she had been distant, cold, avoiding me when I needed her the most. I thought it was just her way of coping with the stress of the custody fight, maybe even her misguided attempt at staying neutral. But I was wrong. She wasn't neutral at all. She was about to become his star witness. I'll never forget the first words out of her mouth when she was called to testify. She said I was irresponsible, that I couldn't hold a steady job, that I jumped from one opportunity to the next without stability. She said I was emotionally unstable, that I had meltdowns, that I wasn't reliable enough to raise my own son. Each word cut into me like a blade, sharper than anything my ex-husband had prepared. It wasn't just the lies, it was who was telling them. My own mother, the woman who raised me, the woman I had leaned on during my darkest moments, was standing in front of a judge and swearing under oath that I was a failure. I wanted to shout, to defend myself right then and there, but the rules of the courtroom demanded silence, restraint, patience. I sat there with my hands folded tightly in my lap, my nails digging into my palms, as the people I loved most turned me into a villain. My ex smirked from his seat, watching my world unravel. My mother avoided my gaze, never once looking at me as she told her stories of my so-called instability. But what no one in that room knew, not my ex, not my mother, not even the opposing attorney, was that I wasn't just another struggling single mom fighting to prove her worth. I wasn't jobless, I wasn't unstable, and I wasn't weak. For 8 years, I had been serving as a judge in the state's circuit court. For 8 years, I had worn the robe, held the gavel, and delivered verdicts that shaped people's lives. I wasn't some drifting failure. I was a woman who had built her career with grit, discipline, and relentless dedication. The irony of it all was staggering. I had spent my career upholding justice, ensuring fairness, and protecting the vulnerable. And here I was, being stripped of my dignity by the very people who should have stood by me, treated like I was incapable of even raising my own son. But I stayed silent because I knew the truth would come. I knew that in the right moment, everything would unravel, not for me, but for them. That first day in court ended with whispers and judgment hanging in the air. I could hear the murmurs as we left the room, people wondering if the accusations were true, if maybe I really was as unstable as my mother claimed. My ex walked out with his head high, his hand brushing against my mother's arm as if they were allies, united in their betrayal. And in that moment, something inside me hardened. It wasn't just about custody anymore. It wasn't just about defending my right to raise my son. It was about reclaiming my name, my dignity, my identity from the lies that had been thrown at me. My mother thought she could bury me under the weight of her testimony. My ex thought he could strip away my role as a mother by painting me as incompetent, but they had underestimated me. They had underestimated the woman who had built her life in courtrooms, the woman who understood that justice wasn't just a word, it was a weapon, and I was prepared to wield it. That night, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the empty space where my son usually played with his toys. The silence was deafening, but it gave me clarity. I thought about every sacrifice I had made, every late night I had spent studying, every obstacle I had overcome to get to where I was. I remembered the weight of the gavel in my hand, the authority it represented, the respect I had earned. And I made a decision. I would not let them destroy me. I would not let their lies become the story of my life. The next day, I walked back into the courthouse with my head held high, not just as a mother fighting for her son, but as a woman reclaiming her truth. What they didn't know was that the Chief Justice himself had taken an interest in my case. He knew who I was, what I had done, and what I represented. And soon, the entire courtroom would know it too. But before that moment of revelation, before the truth was laid bare for everyone to see, I had to endure the full force of betrayal. My ex had more witnesses lined up, ready to testify against me. My mother wasn't done with her performance, and the courtroom was still buzzing with whispers of doubt. I was standing in the storm, waiting for the lightning to strike, and it did. Because justice, when it finally comes, doesn't whisper, it roars. The second day in court was worse than the first. If the opening session had been a knife to the chest, the next one was a slow twisting of the blade. My ex-husband came prepared with more ammunition, determined to paint me into a corner where every path out looked impossible. He had combed through every hardship, every stumble, every imperfection in my life, and he presented them one by one as though they defined me. He spoke of the years before I became a judge, when I had been juggling school, work, and a child on my own. He described my exhaustion as instability, my struggles as weakness, my determination as recklessness. He brought up jobs I had left, conveniently omitting that each one was a stepping stone toward the career I had built. He made it sound as if I had never been able to keep steady employment, when the truth was that I had been climbing a ladder far taller than he could even imagine. And once again, my mother nodded along. Every time he made a claim, she seemed to confirm it with her silence, her downcast eyes, her refusal to correct the narrative. Then, when called back to testify further, she doubled down. She told the court that she had always worried about me, that I was impulsive, that I didn't know how to balance responsibility. She said she had seen me crumble under stress, and that she feared for my son's well-being if he remained with me. Hearing her words, I felt something break inside me. Not weakness, but a shift, as if the last fragile tie that had held me to her had finally snapped. There's a unique pain in realizing your mother isn't your protector, but your accuser. She wasn't simply making mistakes. She was choosing to stand against me, to side with a man who had belittled me for years. I could almost see the courtroom, taking her words as gospel, her age and authority giving her statements more weight than they deserved. I wanted to stand up and scream, to tell the world who I really was. I wanted to rip away the veil of lies and show them the truth, that I wasn't unstable, I wasn't incapable, and I wasn't some drifting soul unable to provide for her child. But I stayed still. I knew better than to let emotion dictate my actions in a courtroom. I had seen enough cases fall apart because someone lost control at the wrong moment. Instead, I let them talk. I let my ex lay out his twisted story. I let my mother reinforce it. And I let the opposing attorney press on with his smug confidence. I endured it all, because I knew that the most powerful blow isn't delivered in the middle of chaos. It's delivered when the room has convinced itself you've already lost. That's when the truth hits the hardest. The judge presiding over the custody case shifted uncomfortably as my mother spoke. He didn't know who I really was. To him, I was just another mother in a long line of bitter custody battles, accused of being unstable, unemployed, and unfit. I could see the doubt in his eyes, the way he leaned back in his chair as if weighing the risks of trusting me. My ex's attorney noticed it too, pressing harder, circling me like a predator sensing victory. But what none of them realized was that there was another presence in the courtroom, quiet, but unshakable. The Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court had entered that day, sitting in the back, watching without making his role known. He wasn't scheduled to testify yet, but he had come to see with his own eyes what was happening. His presence was a storm cloud on the horizon, unnoticed by most but impossible to stop once it broke. When the court recessed for lunch, I walked past my mother in the hallway. She didn't look at me, not once. She busied herself with papers she wasn't even reading, anything to avoid my eyes. My ex smirked as I passed, his arrogance filling the air like poison. They thought they had me cornered, thought their performance was airtight. But what they didn't know was that the tide was about to shift in a way they couldn't have prepared for. Back inside the courtroom, the testimonies continued. My ex paraded friends and acquaintances, each one delivering little jabs meant to chip away at my image. They spoke of moments taken out of context, exaggerated stories of stress, arguments twisted into character flaws. It was the kind of narrative that sounds convincing when told in unison, a chorus of half-truths building a false picture. But I sat there, calm, silent, waiting. Every lie was a rope they tied around themselves, and soon those ropes would pull, tight. The judge finally turned toward my side of the courtroom, ready to hear my defense. My attorney rose, ready to begin, but before he could speak, the Chief Justice himself stood up. The room fell silent. The opposing attorney's smug smile faltered. My mother's face drained of color. My ex shifted uncomfortably as if sensing the ground beneath him beginning to crack. The Chief Justice's voice carried authority, the kind that silences even the most confident liars. He announced who I was, what I had done, and what I represented. He told the courtroom that I had not only held a steady job, but that I had held one of the most demanding, respected, and honorable positions in the state for nearly a decade. He made it clear that I wasn't unstable, but entrusted daily with decisions that shaped countless lives. He revealed the truth that they had all been hiding, the truth my mother had tried to bury with her testimony. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever heard. My ex's confidence evaporated in an instant. My mother's shoulders slumped as if the weight of her betrayal had finally landed. The opposing attorney stammered, scrambling to recover, but there was nothing left to recover. The truth had been laid bare, undeniable and absolute. And in that moment, I realized something. Justice doesn't just happen in verdicts and rulings. Sometimes, justice is standing tall while the lies collapse around you. Sometimes, justice is watching the people who betrayed you drown in the consequences of their own choices. But the story wasn't over. The revelation had shifted the balance, but the fight wasn't done. There were still hearings ahead, still arguments to be made, still scars to be addressed. My ex wasn't going to give up easily, and my mother wasn't going to disappear quietly. The battle had only just begun. The courtroom was never truly silent, not even in those moments when everyone seemed too stunned to speak. There was always the shuffle of papers, the creak of benches, the faint hum of air conditioning. But after the Chief Justice revealed who I was, it felt as though even the air itself had frozen in place. The opposing attorney stared at him as if the ground had vanished beneath his feet. My ex shifted in his seat, no longer proud, no longer smug, but restless, nervous, exposed. And then there was my mother. She sat stiffly, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. For the first time since this nightmare began, She looked at me, not with the warmth of a mother, not with the pride I had longed to see, but with the hollow emptiness of someone who realized their carefully crafted mask had cracked in front of everyone. The presiding judge cleared his throat, visibly unsettled. He hadn't expected the Chief Justice himself to intervene, much less to defend me with such clarity and force. Judges live by order, by hierarchy, by precedent, and now the highest authority in the state had spoken. Every accusation against me hung in the air, suddenly fragile, suddenly breakable, as if the truth had turned them to dust. But the trial did not end there. Courtrooms are not built on single moments, no matter how dramatic. My ex's attorney tried to recover, his voice shaking slightly as he insisted that a prestigious job didn't necessarily make someone a fit parent. He tried to pivot, focusing on the hours I worked, the demands of my role, the possibility that my son would be neglected. His arguments grew thinner, stretched beyond credibility, but he clung to them like a drowning man to driftwood. My ex followed suit, attempting to salvage his case by portraying himself as the more available, more nurturing parent. He talked about consistency, about stability, about the importance of having a parent who was always home. He tried to twist my accomplishments into flaws, my career into a weapon against me. But the damage had already been done. The truth was out, and nothing he said could erase it. I sat there in silence, my composure steady, my heart steady too. For the first time, I felt the tide turning. The shame they had tried to heap on me no longer had weight. The whispers of the courtroom had shifted. People no longer looked at me with suspicion. They looked at me with curiosity, even respect. They began to see me not as the defendant in a custody case, but as a woman who had been wronged, betrayed, and underestimated. But if my ex was desperate, my mother was unraveling. After the Chief Justice spoke, she was recalled to clarify her earlier testimony. Her voice faltered, her certainty gone. She stumbled over her words, trying to explain how she hadn't known the full extent of my career, how she was only speaking from a place of concern. But concern does not explain lies. Concern does not explain why she had chosen to support a man who had belittled me instead of standing by her own daughter. Her credibility was shattered. The courtroom could see it, and I could see it too. She looked smaller than she ever had, like a woman who had gambled everything and lost. Yet I felt no satisfaction in that moment. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too raw. Seeing her falter didn't heal me. It only reminded me that the woman who should have been my fiercest defender had chosen to be my enemy. As the days of testimony dragged on, the courtroom became a battlefield. My ex's team threw every argument they could muster, no matter how weak, hoping something would stick. They questioned my work schedule, my ability to balance motherhood and the bench. They hinted at stress, exhaustion, emotional strain. But with each attempt, my attorney dismantled their claims piece by piece, showing the truth for what it was: a smear campaign built on jealousy and malice. The Chief Justice's words echoed through every session that followed. No matter what was said, the fact remained that I had built a career of integrity, responsibility, and judgment. My record spoke for itself, and the contrast between their lies and my reality only grew sharper. Still, outside the courtroom, the weight of betrayal pressed on me. My nights were sleepless, haunted by the image of my mother taking the stand against me. I replayed her words in my head, wondering if she believed them, wondering what had driven her to side with the man who had hurt me most. Was it manipulation? Was it bitterness? Or was it something darker? Resentment she had carried for years, finally unleashed when she had the chance to wound me. I remembered the sacrifices I had made to build my life, the times I had gone without, so my son wouldn't have to, the nights I had studied until dawn just to pass the exams that brought me closer to my career. My mother had seen all of it. She had watched me work, watched me fight, watched me rise, and still, when it mattered most, she had chosen to betray me. That realization burned more than anything my ex had done. The turning point came near the end of the proceedings, when the presiding judge finally addressed my ex directly. His voice was measured, his words deliberate, but the meaning was clear. He questioned the integrity of a man who would weaponize lies to strip a child from his mother. He questioned the credibility of a grandmother who would stand against her own daughter without truth on her side. And in that moment, I knew the truth had not only been spoken, it had been heard. The courtroom had become my battlefield, but I wasn't fighting for myself alone. I was fighting for my son, for the truth, and for the respect I had earned through years of dedication. And while the Chief Justice's revelation had exposed the lies, the battle ahead would prove whether or not justice would prevail. As the final arguments drew near, I braced myself. My ex would not go quietly, and neither would my mother. They would cling to whatever scraps of credibility they had left, desperate to salvage their plan. But I had something they no longer did: the truth. And the truth is heavier than any lie. The final days of the custody trial carried a tension so sharp it felt like the air itself could break. Each morning, I walked into the courthouse with my head high, but inside I braced for the next attack, the next desperate attempt by my ex, and my mother to twist the narrative. By then, they both knew the tide had shifted against them, but people who are cornered don't surrender. They fight dirtier. The opposing attorney's strategy shifted. No longer able to discredit my career, he tried to use it against me. He argued that the demands of being a judge left me with no time to be a mother. He painted pictures of my son waiting at home, neglected, while I presided over cases. He tried to stir sympathy by suggesting that my ex, with his flexible schedule, was the more present parent. It was a strategy designed to tug at emotions, to distract from the truth with images of absence and neglect. But the irony was clear to anyone willing to see it. My ex wasn't fighting for custody out of love. He was fighting out of spite. He had never been the nurturing one. He had never been the steady hand guiding our child through homework, or the comforting presence during sleepless nights. That role had always been mine. And yet, here he was, attempting to cloak his control in the language of devotion. My attorney countered every argument with precision. He reminded the court of my years of dedication, not only to my career, but to my son. He pointed to the stability I had created, the education I had ensured, the home I had built. He showed that being a judge didn't take me away from my child. It taught me discipline, balance, and responsibility, qualities that defined the way I parented. Still, the attacks didn't stop. My mother took the stand one last time, her voice trembling as she tried to reclaim her credibility. She insisted that she had only spoken out of fear for my son, that she never intended to harm me. She tried to paint herself as a concerned grandmother, misunderstood and misquoted. But her words no longer carried the weight they once had. The courtroom had seen through her. The cracks in her story were too deep to hide, and for the first time, I saw something different in her eyes. Not anger, not bitterness, but desperation. It was as if she realized too late that she had tied herself to the wrong side of the fight, that in trying to tear me down, she had destroyed her own image. But I felt no relief in watching her unravel. It was a hollow victory, one that came with the heavy knowledge that the mother I had once trusted was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. As the trial drew to its close, the presiding judge called for final arguments. My ex's attorney gave a last performance, speaking of stability, of the need for a child to have a present and available parent. He leaned heavily on the same arguments, dressing them in new words, but offering nothing new. My ex sat beside him, jaw tight, eyes burning with a resentment that no longer hid behind confidence. When it was my attorney's turn, he spoke not only of facts, but of truth. He reminded the court of my record, my career, my integrity. He highlighted the Chief Justice's testimony, the years of service, the respect I had earned. But more than that, he spoke of the bond between a mother and her child, a bond that had weathered storms, sacrifice, and betrayal, yet remained unbroken. He reminded the judge that custody was not about punishing a parent, but about protecting a child, and that protecting my son meant keeping him with the person who had always been his anchor. As I listened, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For weeks I had endured lies, betrayal, and humiliation. I had sat silently while my own mother tried to dismantle my life piece by piece. I had watched my ex twist my accomplishments into flaws. But now, at the very end, I realized something profound. They could not take from me what they had never given me. My strength, my dignity, my bond with my son, those were mine, earned through every sacrifice and every sleepless night. The courtroom adjourned for the day, the verdict scheduled to be delivered the following morning. That night was the longest of my life. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every glance, every silence. My son slept peacefully in the next room, unaware of the storm raging around him. I thought about what the verdict would mean, not just legally, but emotionally, spiritually. I thought about the life I had built, the battles I had fought, and the betrayal I would carry with me no matter what the judge decided. The morning of the verdict, the courtroom was filled with a heavy anticipation. My ex sat rigid, his attorney whispering last-minute reassurances. My mother sat alone, her face pale, her shoulders slumped, as if she already knew what was coming. The presiding judge entered, his expression unreadable. The room held its breath as he began to speak. He acknowledged the arguments, the testimonies, the evidence presented. He spoke of the importance of stability, of the need for a child to have a safe and nurturing environment. He addressed the accusations, the doubts, the revelations. And then, in words that seemed to echo louder than any gavel, he delivered the verdict. The custody of my son would remain with me. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, some of shock, some of relief. My ex's face twisted with rage, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. My mother bowed her head, her eyes fixed on the floor, unable to look at me. And I sat there, silent, still, letting the weight of the words sink in. I had won, not just the case, but my truth. But even as the verdict brought relief, it did not erase the scars. I had defended my son, reclaimed my dignity, and exposed the lies. Yet the betrayal of my mother lingered, a shadow that no verdict could lift. The trial was over, but the reckoning was not. Because justice in court is one thing. Justice in family is another. And that was a battle still waiting for me. The verdict had been delivered, but the story didn't end when the gavel struck. Courtrooms can resolve cases, but they cannot resolve bitterness. They cannot untangle the twisted vines of betrayal, nor can they silence the anger of those who lose. And when my ex lost, he did not take it quietly. The moment we stepped into the hallway, he turned on me with eyes that burned with rage. He didn't shout. The courthouse was too full of witnesses for that. But his face twisted with a fury I had seen before, the same fury that had driven me to leave him in the first place. He stormed past me, his attorney trailing after him, both of them whispering frantically about appeals, about strategies, about anything that might undo what had just been decided. It was a hollow desperation, but it still carried a sting. Then there was my mother. She didn't leave the courtroom right away. She sat for a long while after the verdict, her shoulders slumped, her eyes fixed on nothing. When she finally emerged, she looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Her lips pressed together as if words were forming but dying before they left her mouth. For a brief moment our eyes met, and I saw something there. Not apology, not remorse, but shame. And yet she said nothing, not a word. The crowd outside the courthouse buzzed with whispers. Some people looked at me with respect, others with pity, others with curiosity. The Chief Justice had left quietly, his presence still a shadow over everything. That had happened. My attorney shook my hand, congratulated me, and told me the fight was over. But I knew better. The legal fight may have ended, but the personal one was only beginning. When I returned home with my son that evening, the house felt both heavier and lighter at the same time. Lighter because the threat of losing him had been lifted, heavier because of the weight of everything that had been revealed. I watched him play in the living room, his laughter filling the space, blissfully unaware of how close we had come to losing this piece. To him, nothing had changed. To me, everything had. The days that followed were filled with aftershocks. My ex began spreading rumors, insisting the court had been biased, that I had used my connections to secure the verdict. He called me unfit, corrupt, manipulative. He fed lies into the ears of anyone who would listen, desperate to salvage his pride. But the community knew the truth now. The more he spoke, the more he revealed himself for what he was, a bitter man grasping at excuses. My mother's silence was different. She didn't speak against me anymore, but she didn't reach out either. She withdrew, avoiding me, avoiding my son, avoiding the world. People began to notice her absence. The same friends and neighbors who had once admired her now whispered about her betrayal, about how she had stood against her own daughter. Her reputation was unraveling in the very community where she had once held respect. And still, she never came to me. Not to apologize, not to explain, not to mend. She vanished into her own quiet shame, leaving me to carry the weight of the relationship we no longer had. But silence does not erase betrayal. Silence is not forgiveness. And the more days passed, the more I realized I would have to confront her. Not for her sake, but for mine. I could not carry her betrayal in silence forever. I needed to speak the truth aloud, to demand the respect. She had denied me, even if it broke whatever fragile connection remained between us. The confrontation came a week later. I drove to her house, the same house where I had grown up, the same house where I had once believed I was safe. The walls were familiar, but they no longer felt like home. She answered the door slowly, her face pale, her eyes tired. She looked at me as though she had been expecting this, as though she knew it was inevitable. There were no embraces, no pleasantries. I stepped inside, and the air between us was heavy, suffocating. She tried to speak, but the words stumbled, weak and half-formed. She talked about concern, about fear, about wanting what was best for her grandson. But beneath her words, I could hear the truth. Excuses. Excuses for lies. Excuses for betrayal. Excuses for choosing my ex over me. I let her speak, but I didn't. Let her rewrite what she had done. I told her what it felt like to sit in that courtroom, to hear her words cut into me deeper than any enemy ever could. I told her how it felt to be painted as unstable, unfit, incapable by the woman who should have been my greatest defender. I told her that while the court had cleared my name, nothing could erase the wound she had carved into me. She cried. For the first time since this ordeal began, I saw tears on her face. But even as she cried, I felt nothing close to relief. Her tears didn't undo the betrayal. Her shame didn't restore my trust. What was broken could not be patched with apologies. Some fractures run too deep to ever fully heal. I left her house that night knowing something had ended. She was still my mother by blood, but the role she had chosen in my life was gone. She had chosen betrayal, and in doing so, she had lost the place she once held. Driving home, I felt both heavy and free. Heavy with the knowledge that I no longer had the mother I once believed in, free with the realization that I no longer needed her approval, her validation, her protection. I had built my life without her, and I could continue to do so. Justice had been served in the courtroom, but outside of it, justice took a different form. It was not about verdicts or rulings. It was about reclaiming my dignity, demanding the respect I had earned, and refusing to let anyone, even my own mother, strip it away. In the weeks after the trial, life began to quiet down. The frantic pace of hearings, testimonies, and whispered accusations gave way to something steadier, calmer. But silence, I learned, is not always peace. Sometimes it is the echo of everything you endured, settling into the corners of your life like dust that never quite goes away. I watched my son return to his routines, his laughter filling the house again, his innocence untouched by the chaos that had surrounded us. To him, nothing had changed. He still ran to me when he scraped his knee, still curled into my arms when he was tired, still trusted me without question. That trust was what I had fought for, what I had defended, and now, finally, it was safe again. My ex withdrew into his bitterness. His threats of appeals fizzled out once he realized how little ground he had left to stand on. His reputation in the community suffered. People who once tolerated him began to see him for who he was, a man willing to use lies and manipulation to tear down the mother of his child. He still lurked in the background of my life, as all co-parents inevitably do, but his power was gone. He was no longer the shadow looming over me. My mother was different. Her silence stretched on, heavy and unbroken. She did not come to visit, did not call, did not try to rebuild what she had broken. The one time I had confronted her had been enough for both of us to know that there was no easy repair. I carried her absence like a scar, not fresh, not bleeding, but permanent. Family ties may be written in blood, but respect and loyalty are earned, and she had chosen to tear hers apart. At first, I struggled with the emptiness that followed. For so long, I had wanted her approval, her pride, her recognition. I had wanted her to see the woman I had become, the judge, the mother, the fighter. Instead, she had chosen to see me as a failure, because that version of me suited her narrative better. It hurt, deeply, but eventually, I realized something important. Her blindness did not define me. Her betrayal did not erase my worth. I thought often about that moment in the courtroom when the Chief Justice had stood up. His words had been more than just testimony. They had been vindication. For 8 years, I had carried out my duties with dignity and restraint, never demanding recognition, never seeking applause. But in that moment, someone saw me. Someone named the truth out loud, and in doing so, he gave me something my own family had refused to give me: respect. It was then that I began to understand what justice really meant. For years, I had thought justice was about verdicts, about fairness in the courtroom, about ensuring the law was followed. But this trial taught me that justice is bigger than that. Justice is demanding the respect you've earned, even when others try to deny it. Justice is refusing to be diminished by lies, even when those lies come from your own mother. Justice is standing tall, not just for others, but for yourself. I learned that people will sometimes betray you, not because you are weak, but because you are strong. My ex couldn't stand my independence. My mother couldn't handle my success. Together, they tried to turn my strengths into weaknesses, but in the end, their betrayal only revealed who they really were. And it revealed who I really was too. I was not unstable. I was not incapable. I was not a failure. I was a judge, a mother, a woman who had built her life brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, and no one, not an ex-husband, not a bitter mother, not a courtroom full of lies, could take that from me. As time passed, the whispers in the community faded. People stopped talking about the trial, stopped repeating the rumors, stopped speculating about the drama. What remained was the truth. I had fought for my son, and I had won. I had fought for my dignity, and I had reclaimed it. The relationship with my mother never returned to what it once was, but I accepted that. Some battles end with victories, others with lessons. From her, I learned the hardest lesson of all, that respect must be mutual, and when it is not, distance is sometimes the only way forward. One evening, months later, I stood in my backyard, watching my son chase fireflies. The air was warm, the sky streaked with fading light, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. The scars were still there, but scars are not signs of weakness. They are proof that you survived. I thought about everything I had endured, the lies, the betrayal, the humiliation. And I thought about the moment the truth finally came out, the way the lies had collapsed under the weight of reality. It struck me then that this was more than just a custody battle, more than just a family betrayal. It was a lesson about life itself. People will try to define you by your lowest moments. They will try to strip away your accomplishments, twist your story, and bury your truth. But none of that matters if you know who you are. None of it matters if you refuse to bow to their lies. None of it matters if you stand tall in the face of betrayal and demand the respect you have earned. That was my justice. Not just winning custody, not just clearing my name, but standing tall as the woman I had become. My name is Sara, and this was my story. A story of betrayal, of pain, of lies told in courtrooms and whispered in hallways, but also a story of truth, of resilience, of dignity reclaimed. And if there is one thing I learned, it is this. Justice is not something you wait for. Justice is something you demand, even when it comes from your own family. Especially then.